Hey everybody, I'd like to welcome you to the Disruptor League, our Disruptor Studio Thought Leader session. My name is Paulo Corey. I am a designer, the studio director of the Disruptor League, and a huge nerd when it comes to understanding how design, innovation, and disruption work. I really like to geek out on these, getting into the details and geeking out with people who are passionate about the topic. And that's what this Disruptor Studio Thought Leader webinars are all about. It's connecting with experts and sharing the inside track on unique, hidden, nuanced, and sometimes just plain strange parts of innovation and disruptions. These are live 60-minute sessions and are co-led by industry experts and Disruptor League facilitators. Each session will begin with a talk or interview where the guest expert drops some serious insight about their practice and hard-won lessons they've learned. Then in the second part of the session, it's more interactive, and we invite Disruptor League Plus members to ask pressing questions about what they've been struggling with, discuss their approaches and challenges, and connect with other members to share other interests. And as we go through the talk today, feel free to post questions along the way in Zoom, and we'll make sure to get to those. Oh, and if it's not already apparent, these sessions will be recorded and made available on the DL Plus site for members later on. With that, I'd like to introduce our guest presenter today, Jesse Nieminen, who is the co-founder and chairman of Vima, considered one of the world's most widely used and highly rated innovation management software. It's already in 8,000 plus organizations around the world with like PNC Insurance, United Nations Global Compact, and a number of global Fortune 500s. So one of the things you might have missed earlier on is, so Jesse's not only a huge nerd around innovation like me, is excited about technology and innovation and all that great stuff, but he's also a huge geek when it comes to CrossFit and fitness. So if any DL Plus members want to connect about how to innovate and stay fit while stuck during the pandemic, Jesse's your guy. And Jesse's going to talk to us today about how innovation needs to move beyond labs and R&D departments, something that really is near and dear to my heart. So Jesse, you ready to go?
Sure.
So Mark, if we could pass the controls over to Jesse, and so Jesse can share his screen.
Sure, let's see if, I think I should be able to get it up. Can everyone see it now?
We can.
Perfect. All right. So as a kind of like a brief introduction on today's topic, like many of you know, quite a lot of companies pursue innovation with a fully centralized innovation team, or perhaps just within their R&D. But strangely, that isn't what many of the best innovators in the world really do. So today I'll be talking a little bit more about this discrepancy and kind of like exploring it and sharing some thoughts on how you could perhaps find ways to scale your innovation work beyond the R&D department or those innovation teams and labs. So first, let's go through the structure of what we have here today. So we'll start with a brief explanation on what we mean with all of this, then go through a case example that will hopefully shed some light on the topic, and then wrap up with some tips on what you can do to successfully scale innovation in your organization. So to kick things off, this is a simple model that we call the Innovation Maturity Matrix. We basically designed it to help our customers understand why they're facing whatever challenges they're currently struggling with when it comes to innovation. The idea of the model is that all of the top innovators are basically in that top right-hand corner in the advanced quadrant. And then the companies that haven't really done innovation systematically and consistently are on the bottom left-hand corner, and they naturally have the worst results. And the rest fall somewhere in between. So I'll briefly explain each of these groups, and then we can talk about this in more detail. So as mentioned, the beginners are quite self-evident. they don't really do much innovation or are just about to start working on it. And then the traditional quadrant is where the majority of the large consumer goods and manufacturing companies typically belong to, as well as many of the other, I would say, more traditional and conservative industries usually fall into. Now, they usually have a centralized R&D or innovation unit that is responsible for all, or at least the vast majority of innovation in the organization. And that typically means new products in the case of these companies, but of course it can sometimes be go beyond that. Now, some of these companies can actually be really good at creating these new innovative products, and some less so. But what they still have in common is that the wider organization around the unit doesn't really do much in terms of innovation. And there usually isn't a very strong culture of continuous improvement and innovation in place throughout the rest of the organization. Then on the bottom right-hand corner, we have Scalars. These are the companies that are like usually have been beginners, but then they kind of like think that maybe innovation is something we should do. They set up some kind of a centralized innovation unit, which is typically like very new, obviously. And then that unit is often like just tasked with facilitating innovation around the organization, or perhaps sometimes even to kind of like try to make it happen by themselves. Now, aiming towards that unit facilitating innovation around the organization is absolutely a great direction. But the challenge here is that most of the time, these scalars may be able to create quite a bit of buzz with activities like hackathons and idea challenges that are the things that they typically do. But they only then find out that the organization isn't really going to be able to do anything about most of the ideas that come out of those activities. So basically what happens is that these companies end up basically playing what's called innovation theater. So meaning that there's quite a bit of talk and buzz, but not much to show for it. And after the initial rush, innovation might start to lose credibility within the organization, which obviously isn't great for the sustained success of innovation. Now, the advanced companies are then those that are able to bring together the scalable approach of the scalars, where innovation is facilitated around and across the whole organization, and the mature processes and capabilities of the traditional organizations, and basically wrap all of that in a pro-innovation culture around the whole organization. So that might sound pretty simple, but in practice it isn't. The figures that you see here are basically some studies that we've done on this. So we use this framework to survey a lot of companies and kind of like figure out where they belong on each of these quadrants. And of that research, as you can see, less than 10% are in the advanced segment. And the vast majority are either beginners or traditionals. So what's important to also note about this is that this sample is very biased because it's based on our customers and people visiting our website. So it's not like these companies are the ones that don't really care about innovation, but these are the companies that are really taking innovation seriously. But the thing that most people or most companies aren't advanced isn't necessarily just a bad thing, because that means that there's plenty of opportunities to capture for those who can perform at the highest levels. But the important thing with the matrix here is that depending on where you are, there are obviously many different ways you can try to build your capabilities to get to that advanced quadrant. But the bottom line is that it will be different for different kinds of companies depending on where you are currently in the matrix. And you then should be gradually building those capabilities. That is the second part to it. So systematically aiming to get to that top quadrant. So if we look at what all of this then means in practice, it's that for top innovators, innovation is basically just business as usual. It's something that every team within the company does, and every single one of their businesses and product teams are constantly working hard to get better, basically all the time. So that means that they're making small incremental innovations everywhere, but also depending on how the organization is structured, some parts will be chasing after those bigger breakthrough innovations and new business initiatives as well. So the takeaway is that having an R&D unit or a centralized innovation team, while that's not necessarily bad in and of itself, it just doesn't cut it anymore if you want to keep up with those top innovators. So next, I'll share an example of what that will, or that will hopefully explain what this can look like in practice. And in the past, I've often shared stories from companies like Tesla or SpaceX, since what they're doing is pretty remarkable. But the problem with these stories is that they're pretty hard to relate to for most people and companies. So I thought this time I'd be sharing something that's hopefully a little more relatable. And that's from one of our most successful customers, a Nordic Insurance company. And what they've achieved in a relatively short time frame is also pretty remarkable. So about 5 years ago, when we first started working with the company, they were already a very big company in the Nordics, but their growth had stalled a bit. So to correct the course, they had created a new strategy focused on improving customer experience, and then they set out to execute that new strategy and wanted to systematically start working to improve on that. And since then, they've been able to turn that stagnation into accelerating growth in a obviously very challenging industry in these times, and have simultaneously also improved their performance using the traditional metric of the insurance industry, the combined ratio. And to really kind of like achieve all of this, they haven't just relied on getting some miraculous new breakthrough innovation, but it's a result of the relentless execution of really like making thousands and thousands of improvements all over the organization, while of course also introducing some new innovative products and services. Now, the thing to understand here is that they don't just have a single process for doing all of that, but dozens and dozens of different processes all around the organization. And this basically allows them to make decisions and execute ideas quickly and across the organization in a lot of different places, like on a parallel track. In practice, most of the work is distributed. And while obviously the teams can't change anything at will, they do have clear priorities derived from that strategy that the organization has on what to focus and what to improve and innovate around. So that really guides their work all around the organization, even though a lot of the work is actually distributed. Now, as mentioned, most of that is actually what you just consider a pretty incremental improvement, even though they do have those new products and services that they've gotten growth from as well. But one of the things that I think is the most interesting with these guys is that I don't think we've ever heard them use the term innovation, even though that's something they're definitely doing, and a lot of it. But what they've done is that they've, in a sense, harnessed their entire organization to systematically work on finding ways to improve the things that matter the most for their business. And that's really what I think scaling innovation really means. You have to go back to the fundamentals and then just find novel ways to make the company at least a little better every day. And hopefully on some days, a little bit more than that. So if we try to kind of like look at this then from a higher level, what does that mean? Well, with the way we like to think about it, to get it to scale innovation, you have to get these three things right. So you have to have the culture, then all of the practical things around the organization, meaning that people have the right knowledge, the right practices and tools for making innovation happen. And of course, the processes that enable innovation and at least don't stifle it, but also that guide the work towards the things that matter for the organization. So the key with all of these is focusing on empowering the entire organization to innovate instead of just focusing on perfecting the capabilities of your R&D unit or innovation labs or lab or whatever you may have. And the reason for that is that for a large organization, it's really rare that you'd be able to come up with just a single big breakthrough innovation that would suddenly take the company to a whole new trajectory. So in reality, what's required is a very focused and large-scale effort on innovating around the things that will really move the needle for the organization. Now, there's nothing groundbreaking about any of this. The trickier question is, how do you then make all of that happen, since these three things usually mean pretty big changes all across the organization, which is pretty hard to make happen in a lot of large organizations. I think it of course starts with having leadership buy-in for the effort, since without that, it's going to be a bit of an uphill battle. But assuming that you already have that in place, what should you then do? Well, as mentioned, you kind of like have to look back at the innovation maturity matrix we referred to earlier and look at where you are currently. So if you start from nothing, it's very beneficial to first build that separate centralized innovation team to provide leadership, perhaps build innovation strategy, and then to gradually build those innovation capabilities around the organization. So that means that, as you can see from the chart here, the level of centralization will initially grow, but then quickly gets smaller and smaller as you make progress with the plan. And that's where we see many companies make the mistake of thinking that they should just stick with that centralized unit and build all of their innovation capabilities there, just like they've traditionally done with the R&D and every other function for that matter. But the problem there is that innovation isn't really a function. It should be a cross-disciplinary company-wide effort. So if you have a centralized team, no matter how large it is, you will never have enough resources and knowledge to really work on innovations across every part of the large organization, or to support multiple innovation processes that the different kinds of innovations need to succeed. And what's more, the centralized team will also slow down decision-making and quickly become a bottleneck that actually prevents innovation from happening instead of enabling it, because a single team only has a certain amount of bandwidth to know about things that are going on around the organization. So it will become a bottleneck. So what you then have to do, and what you want to do from the get-go, is to aim towards that decentralized state where you have many teams who are responsible for innovating in their own areas, that are guided in the same direction by the strategy of the larger organization. But it still often makes sense to keep the centralized team to support the work of others and collect best practices, which the line in the chart doesn't go to zero at the end here. But again, the goal here is to have every team share the same mindset and to have the same tools needed to be able to improve the business. And basically, once you achieve that, it will have a dramatic impact on the business at large. And that really is what innovation is about. It is a tool for improving the business, not a goal in and of itself. So now that we've hopefully provided some clarity on how we think about this and how we think you should approach innovation in this way, we'll move on to the practical side of things with some hopefully actionable tips and best practices that we've seen work with our work with our customers. My first tip for you is to basically focus on getting incremental innovation right first before you even try to really put a lot of chips into those breakthrough innovations. I see a lot of companies having a hard time making meaningful progress with even pretty incremental innovations. And if that is the case, then it's not very realistic that you would be able to miraculously come up with those big breakthrough innovations that all of a sudden saves your bacon and turns the business around. And the reason for that is that even though those breakthrough innovations obviously are very different, a lot of the skills, capabilities, and even decision-making structures are actually pretty similar. But incremental innovation is just so much easier than breakthrough innovation that it doesn't really add up. But even those top innovators, 90% or more of the innovation they do is actually incremental by nature. Even if they've come up with a huge breakthrough innovation, then to really get that breakthrough innovation or disruptive innovation to the ultimate level of success where it can be, it takes like hundreds and hundreds or thousands of smaller incremental innovations to really build it up to become a viable business and a successful product. So sure, the budget and eventual impact of breakthrough innovations can be definitely more than that. But in terms of the effort, the focus really should be on that incremental innovation and relentless execution capability. And the second point is very much a continuation of the last one. So I'd recommend you to start small and go for some quick wins first. We often see some leaders come up with those big grandiose plans for renewal and innovation. But then reality hits and nothing happens. And the key to solving that problem is to kind of keep that eventual vision of where you want to end up in mind. But then just start taking those small baby steps towards that direction in a very systematic way. So in practice, what this means is that you should start by working with just one or a few select teams first to try to get them to adopt the innovation mindset and to kind of introduce processes for doing that systematically. And when you do that, then you can go for those low-hanging fruits first. And these are basically the ideas that will show clear, tangible results without too much effort or change resistance from the team around you. What this does is that it helps you build momentum and to really kind of get people to believe in what you're doing, both within the team, but also more widely in other parts of the organization. And you can then use those results to win over key people around the organization. And that will again help you basically build an innovation movement within the company. And then once people are used to innovation and continuous improvement and are pretty good at it, you can start to go after some of those more ambitious, bigger projects. And what all of this does is that it allows you to create the right kind of culture while all the time taking those small steps towards that eventual goal that you have for innovation. Third, there are a couple of key mistakes many people do when it comes to the people side of things. The first is that they often either think that everyone is capable of being a great innovator, which isn't necessarily true, or they think that it's so difficult that you should only leave it to a select few people. And of course, both of these views are to some extent correct, but in reality, it's not really that black and white. So it's true that great ideas can come from anywhere. and that involving everyone in the innovation process will go a long way towards creating the kind of culture where innovation can flourish and things can happen at scale. But it's also true that some people are better at coming up with those good ideas than others. And it's also true that most people don't really have the skills, resources, or the authority to make those ideas a reality. So what you should do is to really empower everyone to come up with and share their ideas, and perhaps even provide them with some tools and methods for taking those ideas forward. But to also realize that if you want innovation to really happen, you need to allocate enough skilled manpower and resources to be able to make that happen. So that is the other side of the coin. And finally, the single most important thing that I think you need to get right when scaling innovation is to focus relentlessly on the pace of innovation. Now, that's basically just a fancy way of saying the rate at which you can make improvements. And the reason for that being so important is that it leads to this like compounding exponential return for the organization, and that's what really can allow you to have a tremendous competitive advantage that is basically incredibly difficult for your competition to copy. The curve you see in the chart there is pretty similar to what we saw in our previous case example. And this depicts an imaginary company in an imaginary industry. And the blue line is the industry average, which here has a rate of improvement of 0.5% per week. And then the green one is our rapid innovator. They are moving twice as fast as the industry average at 1% per week. And that is actually still dramatically less than the traditional Kaizen continuous improvement goal of 1% per day. So an order of magnitude less than that. But still, in just a few years, the difference in results will be dramatic, and it will be basically impossible for the others in the industry to catch this company unless they are able to move even faster. So the question is, what can you then do to get this right? And I think there are a few key points to focus on here. It, of course, starts with you acknowledging that this pace of innovation really matters, and that means that you should start measuring it in practice. So that means, like in very concrete terms, it means the throughput and basically cycle times of your innovation process from an idea to an implemented and executed idea, be it an incremental improvement or a new business that you've been able to launch and scale to the market. And then this will allow you to basically spot bottlenecks and barriers for innovation in your innovation process. And that really allows you to make progress in general by kind of like keeping to improve your processes and then removing the bottlenecks from there, but also by offering better tools and processes for people within the organization. So when you put those two together, then you're kind of like at the same time removing obstacles and providing tools that allow them to move faster. Now, I've put together a few links to some resources where you can learn more about the topics that we've discussed today. And Paolo and the guys will be sharing those with the slides after the session. But before we start our Q&A, we do have a campaign with Disruptor League Plus on for you guys, all of you who are members. You get 20% off for all of the premium and unlimited plans for our innovation management software, which is at least in our opinion, a pretty good deal from our already pretty affordable prices. So we also offer a free plan. So if you don't want to like just trust my word for it, you can also sign up for the basic version for free and use it with an unlimited number of users, see how the tool works. And then if you like it, then still take advantage of the offer later on and get started with the systematic ideation and innovation process that we've talked about today. But I think that's it for my part. are we ready to move on for the Q&A?
Yeah, well, Jesse, this is wonderful. Thank you so much. I think this addresses so many of the issues that I think internal consultants, internal designers, internal innovators feel constantly, as well as people who are aspiring to that and who feel on the outside, who do not feel, who don't feel like they're part of the cool design lab, or kind of who have that capability, that thought, or even those who aren't trained in innovation methodology, but see there being a need and an opportunity, but not being included in that. So I think this is really, really important in addressing how do we bring all these people into the fold of innovation. Now, one thing, I have a few questions before we open it up to everyone. Some of the terms that sound like kind of get a little blurred, and so maybe you could call it what's the difference in your perspective between innovation and improvement?
Yeah, so I think like for me, like I like to take just like the dictionary definition of innovation, and that is basically just basically any kind of change.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what, I can't remember the exact definition from like the dictionary, but basically
Mm-hmm.
it is about introducing any kind of change. So
Right.
for obviously for an organization, that is any kind of change that can make them hopefully better, but that isn't of course always the case necessarily, but still, so it can be process improvements, any kind of minor new features or for products or any of that kind of things, as well as then new products and
Mm-hmm.
new business models, marketing innovations. I think like I basically think that like people get, whenever you use the term innovation exclusively, people tend to confuse it with having to launch the next huge success story product.
Mm-hmm.
It just gets pretty confusing for people. So I kind of like to look at it from the very pragmatic point of view of any kind of improvement.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, which fits kind of nicely to the Clayton Christensen definition, disruptive versus sustaining innovation. And I think you've already talked
Yeah,
about that is,
yeah.
you don't want everybody doing disruptive innovation. In fact, probably only, you shouldn't even focus on that until you get the sustaining innovation right, and then get the disrupt, then you get people doing disruptive innovation. But it seems, at least in my experience and what I've heard from other people, is people tend to associate innovation with just that exciting, disruptive side, where fresh ideas, big thinking, post-its on the wall, what you rightly identified as innovation theater. And you brought up the point that it's really important to get leadership buy-in. But what often happens, I've seen in a number of organizations, is that the buy-in is for that exciting part, not for the more consistent, steady 1% a day sustaining innovation. What
Yeah.
do you have any advice on how to handle that, or how to address that sort of shifting the focus?
Well, it like I think it's there's 2 points to that. So I don't think it's like an either or question.
Mm,
I think you have to do both in most organizations. Of course, there are cases where you're in such a dire situation that you really have to go all in on some kind of a big transformation and just like hope for the best kind of like
mm-hmm,
approach, as well as you might be doing so well that it just pays off to really like focus everything on just making the most out of the current opportunity you have and just like try to execute it as flawlessly as possible. But for most organizations, they fall somewhere in between. So you have to do kind of like both. So you have to focus on that operational excellence and really like getting better at what you're already doing, but also
mm-hmm,
search for those new opportunities to take the business to the next level. Um, yeah, but I think that's it. But like when you're getting started, you kind of like have to first, of course, try to educate like top management on that, which might not always be easy, depending on what kind of the culture there is in the organization. So if that is the case, that you're having a hard time at it, like I would go back to what we already discussed during the presentation. So just focus on like getting incremental right first. Show actual concrete tangible business results with like dollar signs printed all over them. Then go to your management and say like, this really like matters. So maybe we should do more about this. And then you can kind of like start the discussion there and build that trust, and eventually like you'll be able to build that like bigger picture, longer term view as well.
So I think you just answered my next question, which is, these are most of the tips at least first seem like they're targeted at that middle to upper management who needs to create the shelter for this type of innovation to work. But I think you already answered it, but I'll put it out there anyways. What do you recommend to that middle management employee who doesn't get the air coverage, who doesn't have a boss or a senior VP or a leader who gets it? You want, you're someone who you see the opportunity, but it isn't in the culture yet, and it isn't in the leadership. What do you recommend to that person who's aspiring but doesn't have the formal station in their company to make decisions?
Well, I think like I think I have 2 points for that. So the first is that, again, like innovation isn't an end and in and of itself. It's basically just a tool for improving the business or the organization. So in that case, like referring back to the example that we talked about, the case with the insurance company, they don't really use the term at all, like the term innovation at all. So like just focus on doing things better, like and just show that like improves the business, and most times your superior will like approve of that. And then the second point is that like everyone can make change and innovate in their own sphere of influence. Now, if you're just an individual contributor, that sphere obviously isn't very big. It's your own job, basically. Maybe something your colleague does. If you're the manager of a small team, it's your team mostly. But within the confines of that team, you still have leverage and opportunities to find ways to do things better and to really make improvements. So I would say that you focus on that sphere of influence first. You find ways to do things that create more value. You find ways to do your job more efficiently and effectively, and that is actually real meaningful innovation. It doesn't have to be those big breakthrough innovations or huge new businesses. So you focus on that, and then once you get the results, new opportunities will open up, and you have built the trust that allows you to kind of like spread the gospel when the time is right.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, that's fantastic advice, and I think that would appeal to a number of the DL members. And so but speaking of which, let's open it up. So let's see, I know we're having a little bit of technical difficulty here, but can we open up the mics? I'd love to. Bill has a couple questions. Bill, if you're still there, it'd be great if we could reach out. Otherwise, I'll read it out and Jesse can respond, but it'd be great if you can. Let's see, Mark, any luck opening up the line?
Yeah, he's able to.
Bill, are you there? Looks like Bill no longer can, but let's ask a new question. So most companies, Jesse, boards and C-suite staff are left brain dominated. I see and have proven the value of advanced creatives add to shape greater relevance, as what you stand for is more important than what you make. Have you factored that these creative skills and attention will soon define success? So I don't fully understand, but I think it's about the special skills of people who are creative and are human focused. Has that factored into your models here, or how you think about this?
Yeah, I think those are, of course, like when we're talking about innovation, like it is about improving things and creating more value, and who you do it for is obviously people and humans. So understanding those aspects to it is of course always like keeping that in mind is always super important. So there are things you can do to improve efficiency that doesn't necessarily like always have to relate to that, but in most cases it is about making people's lives better, be it your employees or your customers or other stakeholders. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind. And then the other part about creativity, I think that is also like it's not about just being creative or just about being analytical. It's about kind of like combining both of those. So like usually innovations come from combining existing thoughts into a new one. So that obviously requires the creativity part, but to really like be able to take those creative things to reality, you also need the kind of like systematic and analytical implementation side of things. So most people don't necessarily excel in both of these at once. So it is about finding the right combination of people who can then bring all of the skills that you need to kind of like help the team or the company succeed.
Thank you. That's excellent. Bill, I see you joined us again. Sorry if I didn't. I misrepresented your question. Did Jesse answer?
Well,
what you're hoping for?
There's a major shift going on right now, and I do appreciate Jesse, and I do appreciate all the different skills that need to integrate to define success. But what I also see is how management is failing or resisting to embrace an important value shift. They've had us through decades of bottom line thinking, and mid to large companies are the worst for younger millennials and younger as places to work because they have such closed cultures. They've had innovation on their top 10 list for decades, and they haven't solved it other than product innovation. But here's the shift. Stakeholders define your success. And when I say stakeholders, I'm talking about employees who determine if you're worthy, you live up to your promises. I'm talking about customers. I'm talking about market influencers who I worked with when I was leading PR for HP. And you orchestrate all those things, and you look at the problems you solve. You earn trust while we're in a trust crisis. You create relevance. When most people who go to work say they're emotionally disconnected to the work, 75% according to Gallup. So I just look at it and I applaud people like Jesse who are figuring these things out, and more people understand their language than they do mine. I was a creative, and I agree with Jesse's statement. It's not just creative, but I grew up with the values. I grew up in Brooklyn in the projects. Diversity was the path to trust, to meaning, to shared relevance, to inclusion. All things most people just lock in on as words, but they don't know how to act on it. So I'm just saying this. I before I retire, I want to know that more people have a chance to shape lives and work that matters. But I also see that leaders are the ones who are shaping the resistance, and we need a way around that.
So, Bill, if I could just one thing I think it came across as what that might be particularly applicable here is that you're saying the value created in innovation is not just in the bottom line, but in value to stakeholders in other ways: quality of life, loyalty to company, experience, all these other things that aren't necessarily factored into a bottom line. Does that kind of reflect what you're saying?
Well, yes, because look at AI. It's dominated our attention and it's going to replace jobs, but you don't see anybody out there saying, what can we do? So it's a partnership between employees now being freed up to matter and plan for that work. So AI in tandem can take the redundancy and manage it. But you don't see the systems thinking as an active factor right now. And I see a wide open field of innovation by just paying attention to the system.
So, Jesse, do you have any response for Bill? And I don't know if there was a particular question, but a lot wrapped up there. Any response for Bill?
I think Bill is definitely right, and I think especially in medium and larger companies, a lot of the times executives have a very short-term focus, and of course, if you have a very short-term focus, that tends to guide the thinking towards the bottom line and just those short-term figures. But if you think about the longer term, then the value that you create, the financial value that you create will come from you creating value to those stakeholders in real life. And then just the financial success is only a measure of how much of that you have created and captured. So I think it's really important to kind of like think about what is it that you are doing for people in general.
We have time, I think, for one more question. Douglas, are you on, around? Can you hear us? There's a little bit of a...
I think you dropped off, Paulo.
Okay. Is there a tipping point where the pace of innovation is too great for an organization to absorb the amount of change needed? Any tips on staying out of the unhealthy zone of too many changes tackled at one time? Ooh, it's a good question.
Yeah, very good question. I think like my brief take on that is that as long as you get things completed, then there isn't such a thing as too much change. But of course, if things get half done, you have too many projects to be able to complete anything at once, or like you haven't really been able to successfully implement the previous change, then there is too much or too high of a pace of innovation. But I think it also comes down to how well you implement those. So even though you have to move fast, that doesn't mean that you would get the permission to kind of like do things haphazardly or kind of like halfway there. You still have to get things done properly and get them like really like to be a part of the organization and the everyday work of people and their culture as well.
Wonderful. That's a fantastic response. And with that, any last thoughts before we wrap up, Jesse? If not, that's
yeah.
Well, I want to thank you. This has been an amazing session. Really a lot to think about, for everybody who is in different phases of their innovation career, or different stations within an organization, or different levels of decision making. All things to really think about as you try to introduce a new innovation, move it up the scale, or even if you are at kind of the upper echelons of innovation. So this is really, really important. Thank you so much. Jesse, you've been, your company is working wonders, and again, you're a thought leader in this space, and so we'll continue to be looking for you for more guidance. Everybody who's checking this out, check out Vima. They've offered a discount for Disruptive League Plus members. As well as come back for our next sessions. Over the next month and change, we're going to have Dean Myers joining us, who's a facilitation expert, who's going to be talking about how to take your facilitation game online. Anna Murphy, who is the CEO of United Way in Southwest Michigan, is going to be talking about how boards need to get involved in innovation and how boards can help shape things and shake things up. And Ralph Morales III is an innovation investor, and he's going to be talking about the idea of how to communicate value to investors and stakeholders. So a lot of really interesting sessions coming up. So with that, I will thank you everyone for joining us again, and thank you again to Jesse for such an amazing session.
My pleasure.
All right, guys, talk to you soon.